in Friends, it was a white fountain. Now look at this fountain here. It's not white.
Oh, yeah.
This is not the same fountain. Everyone thinks it is.
Like a Mandela effect almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Not the same fountain at all.
It's the Scott and Alley Not for Air podcast. The rules are gone. The shirt is untucked. Here's Scott and Alley.
It is time for the Scott and Alley Not for Air podcast. Alley Payne, fresh back off a 4-day run into New York City. And that's always exciting because there's always so much that happens in the city. And interestingly enough, you went with your dad. For those that may not get a chance to hear the show on the regular, you and your dad went. And that is such a cool trip. Actually, we were talking to someone earlier before the podcast, a coworker of ours, and they had even said, they go, that is really the coolest thing.
Yeah, we've traveled together before. We went to England years ago when I was 18, and I knew that my dad and I could easily travel together, especially because he is a go with the flow guy.
Yeah.
Anything that comes up, he's ready. I even posted this on my stories that my dad he is 67, but was ready for any adventure. So at one point, we got in one of those like rickshaw type things.
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh. Is it the ones that play the 1990s rap? Like this was the best. So when 6059 and I were there over Christmas,
yes,
we kept hearing it. And you would hear California Love from Tupac
yes,
from like 2 blocks away, and then it would get real loud and it would go by. And then every once in a while you hear Notorious B.I.G. I'm like, I want to be in that one.
It's so funny because they have these setups that remind you of the 90s. Like some guys have it where the speaker is like right in the front and it's boom, boom, boom,
yeah,
boom. And then other people, now the guy he had like this mini speaker that he almost wore it like a bag around his, like a crossbody bag. So he had the speaker kind of behind him.
Yeah.
And what he did, because we were doing a Central Park tour, so he had a little microphone that was attached to his head, and then he had the speaker behind him, and he would give us the rundown like over here. Let me tell you some of the cool things that we saw.
Yeah, please do.
And then I have to tell you about the museums, which, believe me, it's more exciting than it sounds. Yeah. So one of the things that we saw was John Lennon's old home where he died.
Oh, that's right, because he was shot in New York City. I forgot about that. Yeah.
Yes. So we talked to the guy about going up to the house, but the guy said, we, as New Yorkers, don't do that.
Yeah.
Because that's out of respect for
somebody else lives there, right?
Yoko Ono.
She's still there?
Still lives there. I don't know how she does.
Nope. I'd have to move.
Me too.
Yeah, I'm sorry. That's too much. Every day. I don't know Yoko Ono's lifestyle, and it would be hard as hell to understand or tell us. But it would be weird to me just going to the grocery store or the CVS that's on every single corner in New York City. Did you notice that? Every single corner has a CVS.
Not to be morbid, but I feel the same because I know somebody who their significant other died at their house.
Yeah.
And she sold the house. She had to. There was too many memories of the death there.
Here's an exception to the rule. If it's and interestingly enough, we have a coworker that's going through something somewhat similar, and I'll explain, but not a death yet.
Okay.
So if it was old age and they had passed away, I'll give you a great example. My Aunt Marion and my Uncle Jim. I'll never forget. The story goes like this. When my Aunt Marion passed away, my Uncle Jim was in the basement. He was downstairs doing something. They had a computer room or whatever in the basement. Yeah. And he heard this thud, like boom. And he went upstairs, and Aunt Marion had passed really quickly, from what I understand. That's the story we were told.
In the kitchen?
Yes, in the kitchen. She had just, unfortunately dropped, and it was very sudden. I mean,
she was older.
Not the worst way to go, Well, when we say older,
better than the toilet.
Yeah.
Right? Or a bathtub.
It was one of those things where it was very sudden. He continued to live there for many, many years. Did remodel the kitchen. I mean, that is,
I think you would have to. You're right. That's pretty natural. That I think would be okay. But
John Lennon, to be killed outside of your house? No.
Right. John Lennon had such a impactful death.
Yeah.
That also, I'm sure people for the longest time were visiting the house.
Yeah, absolutely.
When we went there and had said, like, should we cross the street? Because he lived right across from Central Park.
Yeah.
So we said, should we cross the street? No one was there.
Yeah.
No one does it.
I'll bet you on the anniversary of his death, it's strewn with flowers still.
Probably. But, and here's something that we saw, and maybe not on the flowers because of this. So Yoko Ono had created kind of like a memorial. So part of Central Park, she had donated a bunch of money and they made it into like a teardrop section of the park.
Yeah.
They renamed it Strawberry Fields. There's just this one section. So there's that, but there's also this circular spot and it's tiled and it says Imagine.
Yeah.
Around that, people are always playing the guitar and playing Beatles songs. So that was another way that you could memorialize without it being right there at your house.
Yeah.
It's still across the street. What my dad was telling me was that when he was living across the street, he would walk into Central Park all the time. And that people, and this is such a New York thing, which I appreciate, that people wouldn't really bother him. Sometimes somebody would be like, oh, John, hey, we love you or whatever. Also, not that his career ever died, but it was on the down whenever he died. So it wasn't like he was with the Beatles. He wasn't pumping out.
Well, they had broken up and the others were doing their own thing. He was just living life.
Right. Yeah. He wasn't pumping out the hits. You sounded British there for a second. He was living
life.
Yeah. So the other thing about Central Park, there's so many other hot spots, if you will. We saw, the bridge in Elf where they get in the snowball fight?
Is that the same bridge from Home Alone 2 with the bird lady?
Oh, I don't know.
I bet you it is.
I'm not sure. But
remember the pigeon lady in Home Alone 2?
Yeah.
I think it was the second one that terrified, or was it the first one that terrified
Home Alone,
Kevin? Oh, God.
Something from New York.
Yes, it was the second one because the first one, he was still at home.
Yeah,
alone.
What was it called?
Oh, God.
Well, anyway.
Yeah.
So we saw that. We saw the church and the Ghostbusters.
Yeah.
These are all the little different things that the guy would point out. We went over here. Okay, this is where, here's another one. In Friends, you know how they're at the fountain?
Yes.
Well, everyone thinks that the fountain is this one particular fountain in Central Park. Well, the guy, he's got, the books and everything. I mean, they've marketed it so well.
Sure.
The guy pulls out a picture from Friends and he said, see, in Friends, it was a white fountain. Now look at this fountain here. It's not white.
Oh, yeah.
This is not the same fountain. Everyone thinks it is.
Like a Mandela effect almost.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Not the same fountain at all.
Now, interestingly enough, since you're talking about Central Park, I remember watching something, and it was probably one of these History Channel shows or something like that. Do you know? And I think it was around the time. Do you remember in the early 2000s, disaster movies were the big thing? You had the earthquake movie, San Andreas out in California.
With The Rock.
And then there was, and I can't remember the name of it. It was the one with the big storms, and they were in New York City and everything. It was like a flash freeze. God, it was the early 2000s. And they survived by going to the library in Manhattan.
I don't remember.
Anyway, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
It was around that time. And like the shows that do, kind of the documentary type things was on the History Channel. And I will always remember this. Do you know there are pumps that are running constantly underneath Central Park that if the pumps stop working, i.e. if the power went out for multiple days and the pumps stopped working, I mean, it is a real possibility. We had, remember the blackout that happened a few years after 9/11 and everybody thought, oh my God.
Yes, I do. Oh my God, I have not thought about that since then.
Right. Well, and it was, now you look at it, it's kind of one of those minor events compared to what was happening around that time, 9/11 and such. Well, if those pumps stop working, Central Park could be underwater. And people don't realize it, but it's the elevation of where it sits. It would literally be underwater.
I did not know that.
I didn't know it till I saw that. I'm like, that is really interesting.
There are so many little nuances about the city. Mm-hmm. Really one of the greatest cities. It's not somewhere that I would go or live. I wouldn't go and live there.
Right.
Because one thing that I felt, and I don't know if you felt this too, did you feel dirty every single day?
Every day. Every day. Yes.
Okay.
And it's a clean city. Don't get me wrong. Well, 90% of it's clean. I mean, any city has its spots. But But yes, it was clean in the sense that I was there going, okay, this is not a trash heap. But I did feel like, yeah, there's so much going on, whether it's the cars and everything else. I'm like, I want to shower.
Yes. And one of the factors for me was I wear glasses.
Yeah.
So every single night, my glasses would be so dirty.
Yep. And you didn't even go in the subway, you were saying to me earlier.
No. My dad did not want to go in the subway at all. What we did was I paid for the Airbnb and one of the Broadway musical tickets. And he kept on trying to say, well, let me pay you. I wouldn't let him pay for the Airbnb. I said, what you can do is you pay for transportation and our meals, which I think ended up equaling out. I don't know. We weren't going dollar for dollar. That's not how we are. But I will say that eating is very expensive in the city. Ubers, you were saying us not taking the subway. My dad is 67 years old. He doesn't want to take the subway.
No.
Also, I think for him, it was a fear thing because my mom had instilled so much fear that it was like one of the most crime-ridden cities.
Which really, I don't think it's that bad.
No.
As long as you stay in relatively smart areas. Any city, again, has its areas you don't want to go to. Okay, so as we move to more of the things that you guys got to see, I have to mention, and next time I go to the city, I have to find this. Here's another wild nugget for you. You can actually go to the dock where the Titanic would have docked because it was on its way to New York City.
Yeah.
So there is somewhat of a memorial to where the Titanic would have docked. And I want to say, I think it's the same place where the lifeboats that had, gotten picked up from the survivors of the Titanic were taken to. And here's another weird oddity. And if I get this slightly wrong, please don't hold it against me. I'm certainly not a New York City historian, but these little weird things kind of stick out in my mind. I want to say that the docks are not terribly far from Wall Street. Okay, now follow me on this.
I know exactly what you're talking about.
If I'm not mistaken,
Battery Park area.
If I'm not mistaken, and I could be, and maybe it's a different park, so please forgive me if I'm wrong on this, but if I'm right, you'd be able to find it. If you search this, you'll find it. If I'm right, great. If not, you'll still get it.
Okay.
The White Star building, because it was a White Star liner, the Titanic. Well, the door frame to that building, because that building now, I believe, is a financial establishment, which is why I keep thinking Wall Street. So now it's like some big bank or whatever, or financial institution.
Okay.
However, the entryway, it's a very grand entryway when you would walk up to the doors, we're talking like, metal, bronze, gold, whatever it is, with the White Star logos are still there. Now, the White Star line is not, obviously, but is that a wild little piece of history? Because you are dealing with so much history in the city.
Now I have to look that up. And you're right, because one of the things that my uncle had suggested us to do, and because my uncle has been to the city many times.
Yeah.
And we did not get to do this one thing. We tried to fit so much in. But he said, go to Ellis Island. We did not. But one of the reasons why he really wanted to go to Ellis Island is because his wife, my aunt, her dad came on the boat. He came to Ellis Island and they had his name and everything in there.
Oh, that's so cool.
Right. And so they said it really meant a lot to us because we could find James, Keffer, whatever his name. Now I don't even know his name. That's so terrible.
Well,
but let's
only family. Don't worry.
Right. Well, it's like my aunt's dad. And honestly, I never called him by his first name. That's so funny. Anyway, so they were able to find that and then get more history about his travels and things that they didn't know, which sounds awesome. Of course, I'm going to go back. I'll probably hit up Ellis Island the next time.
Yeah. There's so much you could do. I mean, It's crazy because we all think about when we go to New York City, where you want to see the Statue of Liberty.
You
want to go to the 9/11 memorial.
Did that.
Okay, very true. Those are the big ones that a lot of people want to see when they go to the city. Times Square, obviously. And that's always a madhouse.
I could go without that.
Well, true. It is very commercial, very expensive, and need to walk through, but I don't need to be there the whole time. We found ourselves crossing over it a lot to get to where we stayed. But then the other things, you start going into the older history of the city. You're like, This is wild. I mean, it really is. It's an ancient city for our country. When you think about it, there's nothing ancient about our country in the United States. We're only, not even 300 years old, but it's wild the history that's there outside of 9/11, the Statue of Liberty.
Right, especially like all the immigration stories and things like that.
God,
now,
yeah.
you mentioned 9/11. This is going to take me into the other thing that I want to talk about, is the museum thing. Now, this is going to go back a couple days prior to me leaving for New York City. I had two friends that came into town to come visit me here in Corning, New York. If you're listening from elsewhere, we're in Corning, New York.
Yeah.
Corning, Elmira area. So while they were here, we went to two different museums. We went to Corning Museum of Glass and the Rockwell. So in a matter of a week, I have gone to Corning Museum of Glass, Rockwell Museum, 9/11 Museum, the Comic Book Museum. That was something my dad wanted to do.
And now that does sound cool. I'm not going to lie.
That was awesome. But let me just tell you, there are certain types of people in a museum, and let me go over them.
Yeah, well, yes.
Okay. So first of all, there is the person who is the loudest person in the museum. And they know...
Look at the Picasso!
No, here's how it started. We're in Corning Museum of Glass.
Yes.
It's in the name. This woman comes into the exhibit we're in, and she goes, "Do you think these are glass mugs?" No shit, Cheryl.
No.
They're plastic.
Yeah.
Of course they're glass mugs. Oh my God.
Might be in the name.
Right. So there's the loud person that asks the stupid questions.
Yep.
Then there is the person who knows everything. I'm going to give you another example. Here we are, and this was one that I did not witness, but a friend of mine witnessed. So it was two women together. One who was in like a scooter wheelchair, and then the other one. So the one who was in the scooter wheelchair, obviously well versed on glass, and she's talking to her friend. Her friend's like, "Oh, this glass is from the woman who was standing said this glass is from, let's say, the Depression era."
Okay.
Her friend who's in the wheelchair was like, "No, Lori, it's not. It's blah, blah, blah." And whiskey throttles it out of the museum.
Whiskey throttles.
And I said, can you imagine if the woman in the wheelchair would have just gunned it so fast that she would have slammed right into all the glass? It's like the people who slam into gas station storefronts.
Yes.
Like, no, Lori, it's not. Then you have the person who's so loud, who literally does know everything.
Yeah.
And I appreciate that. But at one point we were at MoMA. Okay, there's another one. I was at the Museum of Modern Art, MoMA.
Okay.
So there's these three people.
Is that where they have the Campbell soup can?
They have a lot of Andy Warhol. I did not see the Campbell soup can when I was there, but there was a lot to take in.
I'm like pulling high school art class memories here to pull that one out. I do not know art that well.
So, well, this guy did. So he is with two other friends, and he really loudly is like, "Oh, do you see that Picasso, blah, 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 blah," and showing them everything, giving them the history. And they're all like, "Yes. Oh, yes."
Yeah. They're like, wow, let's just appease this asshole.
And he's like, "Just look at the colors. Do you see the colors, how the colors are going?" I'm like, oh my gosh, yes, we see the colors. Okay, we all see the colors. So there's that guy.
Like this guy wanted to be a tour guide.
Oh, 100%. Then you have the other person who, I am kind of this person, but you have to set up some rules on this. They want to read everything. But, and I love reading everything to the point where my dad's like, "You don't have to read everything. Let's go. Come on." So there's this person who wants to read everything, but they stand right in front of the placard.
Oh, yeah. They're right up
in
there
front
looking.
of the painting.
Yep.
You're not reading War and Peace here, sir. Just stand to the side, read it, and then you move on.
This is like what happened years ago. Do you remember April the giraffe? This was a big thing.
Yes.
Motherfucker. Excuse my language. Whatever. You know what? It's the podcast. I can say it. So this goes back to April the giraffe, and not far from us here. So we ended up, I want to say, I think it was Gavin was very young.
Yep.
And it was, let's go see April the giraffe.
We all wanted to see April.
So we get to, whatever farm sanctuary April's at here, not far from us in the southern part of the Finger Lakes. And there's this family. And it's just like the plaque reading family. There's 82 of them. Okay. And then there's the bossy mom. And she's like, all right, now, Henry, move over here. Okay, Becca, a little to the left, Tara, smile more.
Oh, my God, yeah.
Would not move the family out. There is a line forming behind April the giraffe. This mother had to wait for the giraffe to get in just the right spot where it would come down and be like, now let's wait for April to be able to show her tongue. And right there, we were like, by the time we got up to get
April's
a picture,
not going to show her tongue, okay?
April was like, I'm ready to have another fucking baby. At any rate, it was unreal. It's like people have no etiquette in situations like this. You're like, come on. Do you not see around you?
No.
People become oblivious. They do not. And there's another New York City thing where somebody became oblivious that I'll tell you about. This one's
I can't wait.
It's unreal.
This is like being in a museum.
It is. So you're sitting there. It's like, are you oblivious to the fact there's other people around? And by the way, here's a trick for you. I might just take one quick skim of the first line or two and be like, I'm bored, and move on. You can move back to your damn placard.
Yeah.
Oh my God. So then, and this is another New York City thing. And you, I'm sure, noticed this. Did you do a lot of walking when it got real busy at certain times of day?
Oh, yeah.
Okay. And you do have what you see in movies, the traditional large clumping of people at a red light, and then it takes off.
Yes.
I will never forget. 6059 and I were walking back towards our hotel from wherever we were, and we're walking through Times Square. We're walking straight with a flow of a large group of people. It's the way you kind of go. You just, you grow. This lady, and I have bad peripheral vision to begin with. This lady comes out of nowhere, steps right in front of me as we're going this way. She comes this way. I totally flat tire her. I almost fall on my face. And I was so taken back by it. I turned to her, probably not the thing to do in New York City, but I turned to her, I go, hey, what the fuck's the matter with you? And and I'm like, oh my God, I'm yelling at someone in New York City. But I almost broke my ankle and her ankle. And she just kept going like it was her normal thing.
They don't care.
Oh my God.
They don't care.
It was crazy.
It's funny. I also heard while I was there, and then we'll get back to the museum thing because I have one more, is the hierarchy of the sidewalks. That
maybe I need to learn this.
Well, and it makes sense that elderly people, you have to give them their space.
Oh, sure.
And another one was women and children, especially if they're strollers and things like that, because these people are living there.
Yeah.
This is their life. Like, you have to be respectful if they're trying to get their child from point A to point B. Mm-hmm. Also, people who are usually in it was like, those were the first two. The other one was like business people, that if there is a business person who's walking fast, like, let them do that.
Yeah, they got somewhere they got to go.
Right, exactly. Everyone else is probably tourists. Doesn't matter.
Yeah.
They in the hierarchy, they are at the bottom of the barrel.
Yep.
But so that was the one thing I was really cognizant of, was I was looking for old people, looking for mothers and babies and things like that.
I'm going to tell you, you are probably looking around more than the average person that lives there looks around. Like, it almost becomes a sense to them, like smell, sight, sound. I
think you're right.
So I think you were being very, very courteous, which is good.
Trying to be. Now, the last thing with the museum
somebody
thing,
crisscrosses in front of you, then you're yelling at them in Times Square, and real classy, Scott.
Well, the other thing is that people at museums stand right on top of you.
Oh, God.
I
saw that this happened when we were there for Christmas, too, at the Rockefeller Center. I'm going to come over and I'm going to show you. This is how New York City is, and I hate it. And it drives me nuts. Here it is. We're at the crosswalk.
Uh-huh.
Are you going to go?
Yeah, I know.
I know. Are you going to go? Go. Oh, my God. I hate it.
Oh my gosh.
A little personal space, please. Hi, I'm back.
The one thing and this will be my last thing about museums. I've never experienced this in a museum before. And I've been to the Holocaust Museum, at the 9/11 Museum. So the last time that we were in New York City, Scott and I were there together.
Yep.
And this was not built yet. So did they start it? I can't remember if they started.
Yeah, God, I don't remember if it was still cleanup. No, I don't believe that the actual, what it is today had been started. We were there, my God, it was like 2010, 2009.
Something like that. I remember us visiting, or like me and the person I was with, we visited, and it was nothing like it is now.
Right.
Well, for the first time, and I completely understood it because I got a little teary-eyed, people were sobbing at the 9/11 museum.
Really? I was just going to ask, was it still somber? And
yes, it is. So right before you walk in, there is a sign that says something along the lines of, obviously this is I don't think they said obviously.
Like hallowed ground type thing?
Yeah, that please be respectful of the event of that day.
Sure.
People are still living that life. However they worded it. They were basically saying, be quiet while you're in here.
You should, yeah.
It was the quietest museum I have ever been in.
You got to help me with something on that.
And I'm going to give you a comparison here.
Yeah.
Do you remember right after, and I can't believe I'm going to say this word, I haven't said this word in a couple years, right after COVID, and we would go into the grocery store and it would be somber and quiet and weird.
Yeah.
That is exactly
We're
what
still getting used to shoving people out of our way.
Right. That was exactly what the 9/11 museum felt like. It was so just serene.
Okay, now I have not been to it, so I have to ask you this question because you see angles every year when television does their tributes and such, and they'll cut into 9/11. So there's the two square, it looks like water fountains.
Yes. Yep.
Is that the footprint of where both towers were? That was literally the I'm going to call it footprint. That's all I can do. That was it, where the two towers were.
Yes, you have to go to this museum because they also have certain structures that they have the structure where the plane hit. So that piece of metal, and it's pretty mangled. They have that. I don't know if you remember this or not. This was something that it definitely hit close to home for me. So this was, I don't know, maybe 2 or 3 days after 9/11 happened. There were two beams that formed across that ended up.
Gosh, yeah, this is
you
one
do
of those.
remember this?
Well, do you remember also the picture that went circular back when we only had still images in a lot of this? The picture of the devil's face, the demon's face, and the smoke.
No.
Oh, you got to Google this. This is so. There was somebody that caught a picture, and this is before we were photoshopping and stuff like that.
Yeah.
It looked like a demon's face. If you type in demon's face in 9/11 explosion, I'm almost certain it will pop up for you. I remember that vividly. But anyway, back to what you were saying, because I have another thing about the World Trade Centers too. This is wild.
Well, hold on, because I'm Googling this really quick.
If you get it, you will see it right away. I remember this was a thing. Okay. And I don't believe this was a doctored picture.
Okay.
It was just.
And you're right. This is we had Photoshop then, but it wasn't.
Yeah, but you're talking high end, newspapers would have had it. We wouldn't. It wasn't something that you found it.
Yes.
Look at that. You found it.
My.
Do you want to put it? Can you show it? Is it?
Yeah.
Just for. There it is. That's it. That
is wild. Here's another thing that I thought was really interesting that I never thought of. And even my dad was like, come on, you have watched how many 9/11 documentaries on Netflix and Hulu? Yep. He's like, why are you reading everything? I said, because it's the stories that are grasping me. There's 2 or 3 things that I have to mention. One of them was they had so many phone messages. So you would pick up a phone and it would be like, hi, Julie, it's Brian. I think our plane is being hijacked, blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, I start crying. I'm like, Dad!
Oh, yeah. To hear the voice of the people, it would be like today, if I was going through a box and I found my parents' old answering machine and I heard my mother's voice on there, I'd have to find a way to digitally get it over to keep it. I'm like, it's crazy.
Let me tell you one. So one of the messages that I listened to, the wife, in response to this, she said 9/11, I don't think she said my favorite day, or maybe she did say my favorite day. 9/11 is my favorite day, even though her husband died in one of those planes, because it was the last day we shared together when he was still alive. I'm like, oh my God.
You know what amazes me are in those documentaries, the people that would somehow, I don't know if it was a show of strength for the person that was about to lose their life, or it was the person on the other end trying to console the person that was going to live when they knew they were going to die. But you hear a couple of the messages where they said, things like, well, carry on and give, Jimmy a good life and things like that. And you're just like, I don't know what kind of person I would be like in the face of death, whether I was trying to, because there is in one 9/11 documentary, a air traffic control person, I think it is, or an operator somewhere that talks to someone right up to the end on one of the planes. And they show it every year when they do the 9/11 documentaries, and you get to listen all the way through this. Yeah. And it's the conversation for multiple minutes of the person on the plane and the person on the ground, and they're with them through the entire end. Yep. And then obviously when it goes silent, the people that are observing know, but in that moment, the person that was on the other end who lived, the 9/11 operator, I think it was a 9/11 operator. I'm almost certain it was. Now that I think about this story, they're there and they go, I think they're gone. And it's so wild
they keep so much composure.
Yeah, it's amazing. I mean, that's a true testament to human spirit when you can do that and be a level of strength to someone that is, well, frankly, minutes from their death.
Yep.
And it's not going to be a pleasant one. They may not know it, but you think the most unpleasant part of a death like that is it's coming. You're thinking about it before it happens.
And I was saying to my dad when we were there, now that because this is my dad's first time, and he said probably his last time being in New York City. I said, now that you're here, now that you're standing right here, think about them standing here when this happened.
Yeah.
And he's like, that's exactly it. Like, you just all of a sudden put yourself like, what would I have done on that day? How would I have reacted? What do you do?
And then you did what every New Yorker does. You walk out to the street to where the hot dog cart is and get a steamed wiener.
One other thing. This is another thing that surprised me. And then we'll wrap up soon here. But
because I got still one more thing about the World Trade Center. It's wild.
So one of the things that surprised me was they have different rooms and they give you the warnings. In this room is graphic content.
Sure.
So I walked into the one where, do you remember when people were falling, not falling, jumping?
They decided to jump, yeah.
Yes. And one woman's response to that, it was documented on the wall. And she said, you didn't look away because you know that you were looking out of respect. They were doing what they had to do.
Yeah.
And you were looking because you were honoring them. And I was like, oh my God, I never thought of it that way.
Really interesting.
Because I don't know if I could continue to look, but knowing that they were, that they were going to die.
That was going to be that. Yeah. It was either a matter of do that or really burn to death or, the building came down.
Because they had no choice.
So were you ever in the World Trade Center before it came down?
No.
Okay. So I was but I was very young. Now, what a lot of people don't know, the World Trade Centers really were only open from the early 1970s. Mm-hmm. They were not terribly old buildings. When this happened in the lifespan of a building, you take a look around, look at the Empire State Building. It was built in the 1930s or 20s, I think it was. Mm-hmm. Maybe even earlier than that. I'm trying to remember exactly. But the World Trade Center, so I was, and I know this is the most shocking part of the podcast, I was a Cub Scout and then became a Boy Scout. And we took a trip to New York City as Boy Scouts.
Oh, that's so cool. Wait, you didn't go camping?
No, we didn't go camping. I think we stayed at like some military reserve base somewhere down there. It was the wildest thing. I don't remember all the details, but what I do remember is we got to go into the World Trade Center and go all the way to the top observation deck. And it was night, and it was really kind of cool, but it was a little terrifying because up at the top, they used to have a gift shop. I remember buying my parents a notepad from the World Trade Center.
Oh my God.
And a pen, I think, too.
Oh God, I wish you still had that.
I wish I did too, but I don't anymore. And then I remember we all got to go up to the window at the observation deck. And this is where I got freaked out, even at like 10 years old. So the way the windows used to be was, it looked like it was flat glass, but it kind of bubbled a little bit at the bottom. Okay. So you could like lean over and look down more and see the street.
Yes.
And it was a clearer period. It was very clear, but I just remember thinking to myself, oh my God, this is so insanely high up. And then I remember we started, the descent down and all that. But I remember being in the observation deck of the World Trade Center, probably it had to have been the very early 80s, 81, 80. Somewhere.
I'm going to answer a question for you.
Yeah.
Construction on the World Trade Center began on August 5th, 1966. But It says most of the work in the first 2 years was below street level.
Mm-hmm.
And then it says the North Tower was completed 1970. You were very close.
There you go.
Followed by the South Tower in 1971. Now, one thing I want to see if you remember this or not, because this is something I learned when I was there. Do you remember how quickly you got up to the observation deck?
Well, interestingly enough, I was just recently in the observation deck with 6059 of the Empire State Building. And man, you rocket up that thing. They have you in an elevator that just, you're there before you know it. Your ears are popping it so quick.
Yes. And one of the things that I learned, did not know this. I really wasn't interested in the World Trade Center as a kid. It wasn't anything I was wanting to know a lot of information about. But something I learned at the 9/11 Museum was that they had a specific elevator that traveled so quickly. That's why people loved going there, because they could get to the top.
The express elevator,
yes,
yeah.
Yes. And they even had the motor and everything that was there too.
Oh, that's wild.
What a great
What
trip.
an interesting history lesson.
I know. And what a great trip. I mean, everything, even the learning of the people. The people in New York City is something I could not be this person.
I am with you, though, because, of course, 6059 and I had the conversation. We're like, well, and at that time we were there over Christmas. One of the mega Powerball million things was way up there. And I remember we had the conversation. We're like, well, if we win that thing, we could get a place here and come back and forth. I don't think I could live it every day. I'd love to have something that I could go to. Mainly because I wouldn't have to Airbnb and hotel.
Yeah.
But day to day, it's almost too much.
It's not for me. And I'm going to tell you one reason why. So I was in an Uber, and we definitely get real chatty in Ubers.
Yeah.
So I was telling my dad a story that the Uber driver, he conversed with us on, that here in our area, I have gotten to know in the Finger Lakes, I've gone to so many concerts that I have the same Uber driver over and over. I always call her. She always comes and gets us, does the whole dang thing, gets us at the end. Her name is Sandy. And we have gotten to know Sandy so well that she invited me and two of my girlfriends to her wedding.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. Now, I couldn't go because it was the same day as my brother's wedding last year.
Yeah.
But I was saying this, and the Uber driver turned around and he goes, that is a great story. He goes, that is something that would never happen here.
Yeah.
And that's why, as great as New York City is, as cool as it is, it still just was, it wasn't for me.
Yeah.
It's for me.
Day to day, it just seems like I'd exhaust myself.
I had the best time.
Yeah.
I had made so many great memories with my dad. By the end of
That's so cool too.
Right? By the end, I was ready to go home, and so was he.
I was going to ask you though, but it wasn't parting on like, oh, never going to do that again. Like if he called you and said, hey, let's go do one more round. Could you do another one?
We talked about possibly going at Christmas time. My uncle.
It's beautiful to see. I saw it for the first time this last year at Christmas.
Right. And I went at Christmas time, oh my gosh, like 18 years ago. And I said to him, I would definitely do it again for like 3 days.
Yeah, exactly. But be prepared. Anybody that's listening to this, now, as we always say, not necessarily are these always kid-friendly podcasts, but I would say this. I kept thinking about Gavin and Lydia when we were going to Rockefeller Center, because it is such a mob scene, and you are trying to maneuver your way with literally thousands of people all converging. In my head, my kids weren't even there, and all I could think about was, how would I do this with kids? Like,
that's why I talked about the hierarchy of on the sidewalk.
Yeah.
That's why it's so important to give mothers and children, or kids especially, their space, and old people.
Yeah. Well, that wasn't happening over Christmas. Wow. Excellent podcast. A lot of fun to hear about it. I'm glad you had a great trip. We'll be back next week. I have to tell you next week about the lady that used Divine.
Use Divine.
Yeah, there's a word you don't get to use all that often.
No.
The
All right.
Divine Lady.
We'll see you next week. Bye.
Well, that was fun. Wasn't that fun? That was fun. Do us a favor, will you? Subscribe. Share the Scott and Alley Not For Air podcast. Touch our buttons. We know you want to.